Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing, where today we are going to be continuing to read The Sleeper Awakes. I totally didn't forget that. by H.G. Wells. And we are possibly going to finish it today. It's either going to be today or tomorrow. Looking at that, it's going to be tomorrow. So, let's get going. He felt his stem going down. His hands tightened on the levers, whirled and rammed the engine back. He felt the jerk of a clearance. The noise of the machine jerked upwards steeply, and for a moment he seemed to be lying on his back. The machine was reeling and staggering. It seemed to be dancing on its screw. He made a huge effort, hung for a moment on the levers, and slowly the engine came forward again. He was driving upward, but no longer so steeply. He gasped for a moment and flung himself at the levers again. The wind whistled about him. One further effort and he was almost level. He couldn't breathe. He turned his head for the first time to see what had become of his antagonists, turned back to the levers for a moment, and looked again. For a moment he could have believed they were annihilated, and then he saw between the two stages to the east was a chasm, and down this something, a slender edge, fell swiftly and vanished, as a sixpence falls down a crack. At first he did not understand, and then a wild joy possessed him. He shouted at the top of his voice, an inarticulate shout, and drove higher and higher up the sky. Throb, 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 pause. Throb, throb, throb. Where was the other, he thought? They too. As he looked round the empty heavens, he had a momentary fear that this second machine had risen above him, and then he saw it alighting on the Norwood stage. They had meant shooting. To risk being rammed headlong 2,000 feet in the air was beyond their latter-day courage. For a little while he circled, then swooped in a steep descent towards the westward stage. Throb, 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 throb. The twilight was creeping on apace. The smoke from the Streatham stage that had been so dense and dark was now a pillar of fire, and all the laced curves of the moving ways and the translucent roofs and domes and the chasms between the buildings were glowing softly now, lit by the tempered radiance of the electric light that the glare of the day overpowered. The three efficient stages that the Ostrogites held, for Wimbledon Park was useless because of the fire from Roehampton, and Streatham was a furnace, were glowing with guide lights for the coming aeroplanes. As he swept over the Roehampton stage, he saw the dark masses of the people thereon. He heard a clap of frantic cheering, heard a bullet from the Wimbledon Park stage tweet through the air, and went beating up above the Surrey wastes. He felt a breath of wind from the southwest, and lifted his westward wing as he had learnt to do, and so drove upward, heeling into the rare, swift upper air. Whir, whir, whir. Up he drove and up to that pulsating rhythm, until the country beneath was blue and indistinct, and London spread like a little map traced in light, like the mere model of a city near the brim of the horizon. The southwest was a sky of sapphire over the shadowy rim of the world, and ever as he drove upward the multitude of stars increased. And behold, in the southward, low down and glittering swiftly nearer, were two little patches of nebulous light, and then two more, and then a glow of swiftly driving shapes. Presently he could count them. There were 24. The first fleet of aeroplanes had come. Beyond appeared a yet greater glow. He swept round in a half-circle, staring at this advancing fleet. It flew in a wedge-like shape, a triangular flight of gigantic phosphorescent shapes, sweeping nearer through the lower air. He made a swift calculation of their pace, and spun the little wheel that brought the engine forward. He touched a lever, and the throbbing effort of the engine ceased. He began to fall, fell swifter and swifter. He aimed at the apex of the wedge. He dropped like a stone through the whistling air. It seemed scarce a second from that soaring moment before he struck the foremost aeroplane. No man of all that black multitude saw the coming of his fate. No man among them dreamt of the hawk that struck downward upon him out of the sky. Those who were not limp in the agonies of air sickness were craning their necks and staring to see the filmy city that was rising out of the haze. The rich and splendid city to which Boss had brought their obedient muscles. Bright teeth gleamed and the glossy faces shone. They had heard of Paris. They knew they were to have lordly times among the poor white trash. Suddenly, Graham hit them. He had aimed at the body of the aeroplane, but at the very last instant a better idea had flashed into his mind. He twisted about and struck near the edge of the starboard wing with all his accumulated weight. He was jerked back as he struck. His prow went gliding across its smooth expanse towards the rim. He felt the forward rush of the huge fabric sweeping him and his monoplane along with it, and for a moment that seemed an age. He could not tell what was happening. He heard 1,000 throats yelling and perceived that his machine was balanced on the edge of a gigantic float and driving down, down. Glanced over his shoulder and saw the backbone of the aeroplane and the opposite float swaying up. He had a vision through the ribs of sliding chairs, staring faces, and hands clutching at the tilting guide bars. The fenestrations in the further float flashed open as the aeronaut tried to right her. Beyond he saw a second aeroplane leaping steeply to escape the whirl of its heeling fellow. The broad area of swaying wings seemed to jerk upward. He felt he had dropped clear, that the monstrous fabric clean overturned, hung like a sloping wall above him. He did not clearly understand that he had struck the side float of the aeroplane and slipped off, but he perceived that he was flying free on the down glide and rapidly nearing Earth. What had he done? His heart throbbed like a noisy engine in his throat, and for a perilous instant he could not move his levers because of the paralysis of his hands. He wrenched the levers to throw his engine back, fought for 2 seconds against the weight of it, felt himself righting, driving horizontally set the engine beating again. He looked upward and saw 2 aeroplanes glide shouting far overhead, looked back and saw the main body of the fleet opening out and rushing upward and outward, saw the one he had struck fall edgewise on and strike like a gigantic knife blade along the wind wheels below it. He put down his stern and looked again. He drove up, heedless of his direction, as he watched. He saw the wind vanes give, saw the huge fabric strike the earth, saw its downward vanes crumple with the weight of its descent, and then the whole mass turned over and smashed, upside down upon the sloping wheels. Then from the heaving wreckage a thin tongue of white fire licked up towards the zenith. He was aware of a huge mass flying through the air towards him, and turned upwards just in time to escape the charge, if it was a charge, of a second aeroplane. It whirled by below, sucked him down a fathom, and nearly turned him over in the gust of its close passage. He became aware of 3 others rushing towards him, aware of the urgent necessity of beating above them. Aeroplanes were all about him, circling wildly to avoid him, as it seemed. They drove past him, above, below, eastward and westward. Far away to the westward was the sound of a collision and 2 falling flares. Far away to the southward a second squadron was coming. Steadily he beat upward. Presently all the aeroplanes were below him, but for a moment he doubted the height he had of them, and did not swoop again. And then he came down upon a second victim, and all its load of soldiers saw him coming. The big machine heeled and swayed as the fear-maddened men scrambled to the stern for their weapons. A score of bullets sung through the air, and there flashed a star in the thick glass windscreen that protected him. The aeroplane slowed and dropped to foil his stroke, and dropped too low. Just in time he saw the wind wheels of Bromley Hill rushing up towards him, and spun about and up, as the aeroplane he had chased crashed among them. All its voices wove into a felt of yelling. The great fabric seemed to be standing on end for a second among the heeling and splintering vans, and then it flew to pieces. Huge splinters came flying through the air. Its engines burst like shells. A hot rush of flame shot overhead into the darkling sky. And with that, we come to the end of the episode. So, I will come to the end of the episode. So I will say thank you very much for joining us today. I forgot what I normally say there. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night. No matter what time of day it is, I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.